But we who came from outside, they didn't know our first names.
Using $300 from this $1,000. And we were able to drum up $63,000 to do the trial event.
Trade, you have to have a trade. Mine was a shoemaker. Can you imagine I'm making shoes right now?
Community Legends, only on Tobago Channel 5.
Good evening and welcome to High Five Reloaded. I'm your host, Crystal Gift. We have an interesting discussion tonight on a panel to deal with this issue of the use of masks in public places. And I believe there was some information about an incident in one of the banks involving a certain gentleman, I think his name is Lyndon Mack, with regard to its use and the bank's policy in respect of same. And we're going to use that as a touchstone for a wider discussion generally on masks. So that's going to be our topic for tonight. And let me introduce members of the panel to you. Well, Mr. Lyndon Mack is here. He's the community activist we're going to speak to first before we break into the panel. And that panel comprises Mr. Anderson Charles, a retired journalist, Dr. Israel, she's a public health doctor, and we have Ms. Melanie Roberts Rajman, attorney at law. Ladies and gentlemen, or lady and gentlemen, welcome, because I don't think Ms. Roberts Rajman is with us as yet. But we do have to get going. Right.
Good evening.
Mr. Mack, welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, I understand you were the unfortunate gentleman about which this circumstance arose. You care to tell us what happened? You don't necessarily have to identify it, but what was the incident involved?
But basically, I went to do a transaction. COVID-19 has impacted the world, but we still have our lives to go about. People have bills to pay, people have payments to make, and all these different things. What I encountered at the bank, I went to do a transaction, and I was told by the institution that I would not be afforded service because I did not have my mask on. And in trying to explain my situation to the institution, it became a situation where it became somewhat of a standoff, as they will say in the local language. And the officers came, they explained the situation. I took the liberty to explain to the officers and correct one of the officers based on the information he gave. And before I know it, I was arrested. And now we are here.
Okay. You may have been arrested in the sense that you were detained. But were you arrested in the sense that you were charged?
I was charged.
You're charged with what offense?
I was charged with section 52.2 of the Constitution for disorderly conduct.
No, not the Constitution. That wouldn't be the Constitution, but all right, section 52.2, disorderly. You were charged with disorderly conduct.
Correct.
And you were charged by a member of the police service?
Correct.
Let's see. Interesting. Disorderly conduct. So what was What was it about yourself that you needed to explain or try to explain to the bank officials?
Well, first, let me take the time to explain. We have here a human rights issue based on statements made by the Prime Minister. Corporations have enforced a law, and even in that law that have been enforced, as an individual, I have not said to corporations that they cannot make a law or a rule. However, as an individual, based on my personal belief system, I have my constitutional rights. I am feeling now that my constitutional rights are not protected. If I have to go to an institution, I have to take the time to explain to them this situation. And if not, you're saying no mask, no service. And I respect that. And what we have failed to understand is the World Health Organization has indicated that where there is widespread panic, that institutions can set up mechanisms. We have said social distancing. In certain situations, you have said wash your hands. And in other instances where social distancing cannot be maintained, it is recommended that you wear a mask. And in the period that the World Health Organization has been going on, and we have been seeing the different changes of information, because if we have followed carefully, we have realized at one point in time that the minister said no mask, you should not wear a mask, it is much dangerous to wear a mask. Then you saw a different change of that situation. Now, as an individual citizen, I am saying that I live a healthy lifestyle, I maintain a healthy lifestyle, and I should be able to go about my life as a healthy individual, and that if the law cannot protect my constitutional right as an individual, then we have a problem. And it's not really about trying to be a danger to the community, but we're saying that we have a law set up in place to protect the constitutional right of everybody, regardless of your medical status, your race, your religion. We have a constitutional right enshrined by law to protect every citizen. But we have a situation right now where that has not been fully practiced to an extent where we have proper checks and balances in place. And this is why we are here today.
All right, so the right you were trying to explain to the officers in the bank was not that you had not that you had a health issue about which you would be concerned wearing the mask, or you needed to, you were unable to, for health reasons, wearing the mask. What you were trying to explain to them was that for constitutional reasons, you were opposed to wearing a mask. Is that what this is about?
Correct. And it's not really opposed to wearing a mask. I made a conscious decision as to my specific reasons why I decided not to wear the mask. And I mean, we have to understand in a social context, when you are sick, you go to the doctor. When you need to go to the dentist, you go to the dentist. When you need to extract a tooth or get dental cleaning, you go to the store. When you need to purchase groceries, there's a needs analysis and a want analysis. I'm not a sick individual. And if there is a situation where you have an unwide discrimination happening because there may be a fear of someone's medical status, you are now openly practicing a level of discrimination to the wider community. And if this is where we are today in 2020 and we are still not adhering to these things, then what is to stop the individual from saying, you know, I can put up any corporation and I can serve one class of race, or I'm not open to having any particular class of race in my store? What is to stop it? we're saying that any corporation reserves the right to make a law, but where it comes to the supreme law, it must not infringe on one's constitutional right to invade on their belief system. Before COVID-19, we know banks have their policies. But would the bank have taken the same stance if a Muslim woman walked into the bank and said, said because of her personal belief system, she prefers not to show the revealing of the covering of her face? The bank will be out of place to tell a woman to remove her covering. However, if they need to identify that, then they will need to make provisions for that client. We have seen an industry. Airports are the most restricted industries across the world, highly protected, and we have persons passing through. But when it comes to verification, they make sure that they put things in place. And I'm saying, as an individual, I respect the bank's policy, but I'm saying it should not infringe on my personal belief system. That's all I'm saying.
All right. By the way, when you went to the bank, when was this incident, by the way?
It was Friday, 5th.
When you went to the bank, did you believe or suspect that you would have an issue with not wearing a mask in the bank?
Well, no, I did not, because social distancing was practiced. If anybody has gone to Spirit Republic Bank of Canada, Scarborough, you will realize that the accused markers placed on the floor, and they were still practicing the social distancing mechanism where 5 persons in the bank at a time. So I did not believe that it would have caused a problem.
And what, by the way, what did you say you were charged with? Again, by
disorderly conduct.
And what was the disorder that
I am not sure.
What?
I'm trying to understand myself.
What disruption was there? Did they take you aside to talk to you, or you were in the line and people couldn't get ahead or something like that?
Well, what really happened is when I entered, one of the security officers asked me about the mask issue, and I told her my situation. She told me I needed to exit the bank, and I said to her, basically, I asked her why. And she asked me to hold to the side, and I asked her what is the reason for holding to the side, and she didn't really give me an answer. So I proceeded to the bank as the line as possible as regular. And then we had the next gentleman come in, and the courtesy was not there. He started raising his voice, and I tried to calm the gentleman down until bank workers had to come and calm him down. And then the manager came, or someone who I think came and approached me, and I tried to explain the situation. And before taking the time to finish the explanation, I had someone who represented the institution walking away saying to me that no service would be afforded to me today simply because I did not wear the mask.
All right. Interesting discussion. You might perhaps want to raise with the court the fact that you were on bank's property when this alleged obstruction occurred as part of what your defense will be. But interesting enough, we'll see what the court decides when the matter comes up. But thanks for letting us know what had happened. And at this point in time, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go take a break and come back and throw the matter into discussion with our members of the panel.
High Five with Christo Gift Senior Counsel, discussing real issues, political decisions, and economic trends affecting Tobago. High Five, Mondays at 8 p.m., only on Tobago Channel 5.
Hi, welcome to the
Division of Education,
Innovation and Energy
e-learning program.
Every Monday and Wednesday at 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. right here on Tobago Channel 5.
Look out for COVID-19 related scams. Be alert. Fraudsters are using the fear of economic conditions related to COVID-19 to target victims by posing as reputable agencies. Be on the alert. Ask questions. Be aware. Never share your personal information via phone, text, email, or social media. Always contact the agencies directly to verify information.
Don't lose your hard-earned money. Think before you invest. Beat investment fraud.
Visit the new and improved Belfonds Hardware Limited, number 17 Canby, Mount Pleasant. Spacious showroom for your convenience. All hardware items including blocks, steel, paint, toilet sets, power tools, lumber, and everything plumbing and electrical. Open Sunday to Friday. 631-0911.
Right, we're back. And, well, you heard the incident. It occurred on a bank's property. The gentleman has been charged by the police with creating, I believe he said, an obstruction. Dr. Israel, his position is that as he looks at it, he has a constitutional right, and the fact that the bank required him to wear a mask didn't override his constitutional right. Let me ask the most simple question this way: what is the weight of the instructions by the it's the medical I forgot these directives that come from the Ministry of Health in terms of what you must wear, what you must do. I believe they now have a requirement that you should wear masks. As a matter of fact, I think the World Health Organization recently issued a release that suggested that the mask, if you're making them at home, it should have at least 3 layers of cloth. But what is the position with regard to the latest on the ministry's position with regard to masks? Is it a directive?
So what Mr. Mack is identifying really is an issue that is long-standing when it comes to individual human rights versus public health responsibility, and the need for public health professionals to protect the entire community while trying to have a balance between protecting an individual's personal right. That has caused many court cases all over the world. For centuries, this has been an issue. So this is not a new thing. What is currently the policy or the recommendation is to use as many mechanisms to try to prevent the spread of COVID-19 as possible. Now, technically, according to, if you look at what is written on the books, and if you look at what is written in the public health ordinance, for example, there is no wording in the public health ordinance that says you must wear a mask. But there is also no wording in the public health ordinance that says you must wash your hands, or you must cover your cough when you are sneezing, or you must do any of these other things. What we've done is identified several different options, several different things that collectively will help us protect each other. So the public health ordinance currently specifically speaks about issues relating to quarantining. It speaks about issues relating to what can be open and how many people can be in a space at a certain time and so forth. But there are other softer issues, other softer policies that are the recommendations of now the World Health Organization and the Ministry of Health that says, in addition to everything that we have written in the law, these are the things. Because right now, there is no law that says you must stand 6 feet away from each other. And also, there is no law that says that. But again, it is one of the many tools that we can use. And because COVID-19, because SARS-CoV-2 is so new, and because there's so much about this infection, this disease that we are now learning, it is one of those things that it is better to be more cautious and better to use all of the mechanisms that we have suggested, because we still don't know so much about this disease and about the virus that causes this disease. So no, there are no actual laws that says you must stand 6 feet apart, or you must wash your hands, or you must wear a mask. But these are the recommendations at the WHO, these are the recommendations at the CDC, these are the recommendations at the Ministry of Health. There have been orders, for example, if you look at New York, Governor Cuomo has actually done what he calls orders. It's not a law per se, as in written, you must do it or you will get arrested. But coming from the governor is asking you to do this, and the governor is decreeing that you do this and asking all of us to be responsible to do that. So the same thing is happening here as it relates to the Ministry of Health and the need to wear a cloth mask when you are in a state where you may not be able to stay at least feet away from another person. And that is when you're in public, that is when you're in public spaces where there is the possibility of that kind of interaction, just because you're passing each other. And a simple thing as walking through a door. So walking through the door of a bank, while you are standing in the bank, you may actually be standing 6 feet away from each other. But the process of walking past someone to get in and out the door may reduce that 6 feet distance between you and the other person. So it's in those situations where we are saying, let us use all of the tools that we have at our disposal to try to protect all of us. That is where we are as it relates to that.
All right, Melanie, I'm going to come back to you shortly. But let me get something from Durston. What has, in your experience, how has the public been reacting to this, to these health regulations?
Well, good night, everyone, and it's good to be here again. I think by and large, the public has responded favorably to the restrictions, the stay-home measures, the 6 feet, the social distancing or physical distancing, as you might call it. And the issue of the masks or the need to wear a mask, one will at a personal level, I cannot wear a mask due to my health issues. So when how do you distinguish that situation when you get to the bank? Is there a document, a medical document, some certification of something that you take to show them that that is in fact the case? No, I just for example, I've been to supermarkets and the security would ask me for my mask, and I told them I can't wear that. And it will be up to them to say whether I can continue or they will not allow me in. If they didn't allow me in, I go to another supermarket that would allow me in. I see. All right. At this stage of my life, I tend to shy away from the confrontational kinds of vibes because of what I have been through a year ago. So that if I am denied service, I go somewhere else where I would be given service and where I would spend my money. In terms of the whole mask situation, as we know it is not a law, okay? It is a recommendation, and they are now putting the onus on the business owners to implement it, to deny entry or to deny service if you don't have on a mask. But there are many of us who can't wear masks. For example, those people with asthmatic issues, those people with sinus issues, those people like me with my own issues, we cannot wear masks. So that the whole mask thing is very discriminatory, and we have to be able to find a middle ground in terms of trying to apply as a recommendation that could have even more disastrous effect on the health of the individual. Melanie, what's the legal position on this matter?
All right, so I want to point out three things. The first two I'll point out very briefly. I agree with Faith in her assessment. You know, we have to think about the public interest, and this has become a public safety concern, and these mechanisms have been implemented in the interest of the public. And that outweighs, at this point, any individual right that any person might think that they have. This is not something that is new. From the beginning of time, public and private institutions have been granted the autonomy to implement policies and regulations that govern the way that they operate when they believe that it's in the public interest. So you go into a bank, you can't wear a hat because for security reasons, the camera needs to see your face. You go to the library, they tell you no food and drink because they need to protect the books so that other persons in the public could use it. You go to a construction site, you are required to wear certain safety equipment. So this is nothing new. You go to the security, you go through airport security, you're required to go through a scanner, you're required, if you're traveling international, to remove your shoes. And while you do have a constitutional right and a privacy right to not be interrogated or scanned in this kind of way, it doesn't outweigh the public interest in ensuring that our ports of entry and our ports of leaving are secured. In terms of the legal aspect of this, I think that's something that we have missed in the conversation is the actual action that Mr. Mack would have been arrested and subsequently charged for. I do not believe that he was charged for not wearing a mask. He was charged for disorderly conduct. So that's what we have to focus on, and that's what he needs to understand as well, that it was his conduct, I guess, as a result of him being asked to wear a mask that would have resulted in the arrest and the charges that were laid on Friday. Nowhere in the conversation have we even begun to consider that. So while there's, as we rightly said, I think we all agree that there's no law, there's no legal grounds for arresting somebody for not wearing a mask in a public place. However, there are laws that govern and regulate how we behave in public, and it allows the police to come in and it allows them to arrest us if our conduct is disorderly in public. Also, to add to Mr. Charles's opinion, his view that, we have to find a middle ground. That is true. We must factor into the conversation, however, the strides that most of these institutions would have been taking to ensure that they sort of reach everybody as much as possible. I know that most banks would have implemented increased online banking services. The banks would have gone to great lengths to send emails out to customers explaining how you pay your bills online, how you do transfers online, all the services that you can now access online. So for persons who might have some difficulty wearing the mask in public, because that is a really serious concern, it is a real concern for persons who might be immunocompromised, for persons who might be more susceptible, there are mechanisms being put in place to allow them to stay at home and have their business conducted.
How do you deal
let me just jump in here. I don't think the onus was on the government to make a carte blanche directive and say, if you don't wear a mask, no service. That is discriminatory. I have a serious problem with that. And some business people are implementing it. They are implementing, if you don't wear a mask, you get no service. If you don't wear a mask, you cannot come in here. That should not be. That is discriminatory, and that is against my fundamental rights.
So we just spoke about the public interest and making policy recommendations that treat the public safety concerns. Had the government not taken a position, we would have left businesses open to implement whatsoever they need. And we don't know what that would have looked like. I think it was very essential that the government stepped in and gave some guidance where that is concerned, much like governments all around the world have been doing, which is providing the recommendations, providing the guidelines for businesses and public entities to follow.
And therein lies my difference here, in that this government seemed to be looking at other jurisdictions and seeing what they had done in terms of their COVID positive cases. In our case, in Tobago, for example, we had 4 positive cases, 1 death, and we had no new COVID positive person in the island for over 6 weeks. But yet we have everybody wearing masks. The WHO says that they use masks in a situation where there's widespread spread. We have not had any widespread spread in Tobago, and for that matter in Trinidad. Why then do we need to put all these heavy strictures, measures in place for a situation that we could have created according to our situation and not according to what is happening in New York, in Spain, in Italy, in China.
Dr. Israel, would it be correct to say that some of the local health measures have penal consequences while others are more a matter of moral suasion?
Yes, certainly. Many of the public health measures have penal consequences. For example, if you have been identified as somebody who is at high risk, meaning you've either come into contact with somebody who is positive or come into contact with somebody who they suspect is positive because they haven't gotten the results yet back, you are required to go into quarantine and to sign a legal document that says you understand what quarantine is and that there are legal ramifications for not abiding with the quarantine measures. So yes, there are aspects of the public health ordinance and aspects of the Quarantine Act that have actual penalties that are either, most of them are monetary penalties. A few of them are, they put you away for a little bit and release you and kind of thing. But the reality is, though, most of the public health regulations around the world tend to use a nice mixture of moral suasion and penal
consequences.
Consequences, yes, that's the word. Because you are trying to, again, it goes back to trying to have this balance between the individual right and the need to protect the public. So, for example, a perfect example, and this is something that has been an issue worldwide. Most quarantine acts, for example, would come into place if you may have an infection or you may be, they may think you have an infection that can affect other people. They would still try to maintain your individual right to not be treated and to not even be tested, depending on where you are. But the Quarantine Act in most places would then remove you from the rest of the population. So again, we're trying to balance you having your individual right of not getting treated or not getting tested if you don't want to access medical care that way. But we are then trying to protect the rest of the island, the rest of the country that also has a right to not get infected by you or to not be negatively impacted by you maintaining your right. Now, I would want to add one quick thing, though, is that, yes, there is an understanding that there are people who can't wear a mask for whatever reason, whether they have asthma, or they have COPD, or they have any other reason why they can't wear a mask. Those people, though, again, need to be very, very careful, because the little that we do know about COVID-19 is that those are the people where if they are infected, the consequences are so dire. Those are the people who end up being hospitalized, being nebulized, being intubated, and even dying. So those are the people, quite frankly, if you are in that category, you need to ensure that you protect yourself even more than the rest of us are trying to protect ourselves, because the consequences, the result of you getting infected is so much harder, it's so much worse, it's so much more critical than the rest of us who are trying to protect everyone. So that is something, that is a balance that we definitely need to take into consideration and we need to look at.
Right. We're going to have to take a break at this point in time. So stick around, we'll be back shortly.
Tune in to Spot On. A new episode premieres every Tuesday at 8 p.m. only on Tobago Channel 5. Hi, welcome to the
Division of Education,
Innovation and Energy
e-learning program.
Every Monday and Wednesday at 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. right here on Tobago Channel 5.
So
Rise and Shine in the morning is just part of my day.
From 6:30 to 8:30 every day. Foreign man says so.
It informs me of what happens in Tobago.
I find it to be so informative. Every aspect of Tobago affairs is being discussed there. So I will continue to look at Rise and Shine. That's my thing.
Monday to Friday, 6:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m.
I love Rise and Shine.
Right. We are discussing an incident on High Five Reloaded involving a citizen who, whilst in a bank, upon refusing to wear a mask, apparently the situation developed to the point where he was charged by the local constabulary, as it were, and faces criminal prosecution in the magistrate's court. Now, Melanie, a question I have for you is, to what extent do we know if, well, I know Dr. Israel spoke about it, and I guess the position is the need to wear masks is not prescribed with a penalty, is it?
No, it's not.
One of moral suasion.
Correct.
What is the situation where you're found in a bank, which is an organization with its own private property, and end up being charged by the police for behavior as though it occurred in a public place?
So the only penalty, and as we said, it's not enshrined in law. So the only penalty is the private institution, as the bank here, right to refuse service. Much like if you go in there with a cap and you refuse to remove it, they have the right to refuse service. The penalty comes in for the actual charge, which was disorderly conduct. We need to continuously make that distinction.
But the question,
there's no penalty for not wearing a mask. The institution just decides not to serve you.
What is disorderly conduct on private property?
But isn't it the same way on private property? If I am abused by my spouse, the spouse can get charged. So private property does not take away from the fact that it is something that is against the law.
He doesn't get charged for behaving obscenely on private property. What he gets charged for is either assault or battery on his wife, or some other legislation, or of some other offense that is prescribed in law. That's my point. I just interested. They didn't just put him.
Saying that disorderly conduct cannot happen inside of a private space? Is that what you're saying?
Of course it does. Once it's a place of public resort. So once it's privately owned but frequented by the public, a bar, a restaurant, the mall, a cinema, the bank. Once you're in that place, where even if it's privately owned, once it's a place of public resort where the public frequents and you behave disorderly, you can be arrested. So there's no distinction because it was the bank as opposed to maybe the division of tourism.
Interesting. I certainly would like. I perhaps should keep a listening ear for the outcome of that case as to the tact that the attorney takes in relation to the charge, because I'm a little bit taken aback by the charge itself in the context of, I'm on the assumption that these activities took place in the bank itself and not outside of the bank. Because I'm a little more reticent about the idea that you will charge him for disorderly conduct on what is in essence private property, which is where the private security is retained and where they have, I would have been, if the bank's security had in fact charged him, it's one thing. But the public, the police service charging him for behavior in the bank that doesn't involve a criminal and known criminal activity, like you try to steal something or rob or whatever. It's just a matter of behavior in the bank.
It is an interesting thing to be followed up, I imagine.
Mr. Gift, I think by the time the police got to the institution, there was something happening on the outside of the door of the bank.
Then I perhaps could understand that, because I mean, I've known cases where the state has had to pay money for the conduct of a bank locking its personnel in the bank compound and conducting a search. I know that the bank, I know of cases where the bank has been held culpable for that sort of a detention where on their own property they prevent people from leaving and in fact engage in search of the person's person. I could understand that, but this whole idea about disorderly conduct in a bank, which is really private property, it escapes me. But I mean, as I said, the outcome of this matter will be interested, and I see more likely a situation where what would have, at the time of the charging, something may have happened on the outside where they were at the time, why the police intervene, why the police charging him with disorderly conduct may perhaps carry more weight outside of the...
Also, what I find rather ironic about this whole situation is that the bank, which operates on facial identification, has now been made to require its clients to cover their faces.
Do you remember Tobago who had a problem with the bank and his...
Yes.
But let me jump in with that. I think what the guidelines, and again, it goes back to a very lengthy list of guidelines that the Ministry of Health, which basically adapted them from the CDC and WHO. What the guidelines for those institutions, for example, say is that in an effort to do the recognition that is critical, they can ask if the person, they've been saying, okay, because you're wearing the mask, that you should not have a covering of your eye that is like a dark glasses and so forth, that completely prevents them from recognizing who they are. And there is nothing that says that while you are there, for example, while you are being seen by the teller, that if they need you to remove your mask to identify yourself and put it back up, then that is something that they can ask you to do to ensure that the person who is standing there is the person who they should be dealing with, who is the person whose ID they are looking at. Again, remember, we are looking at a situation where we have to treat with the fact that COVID-19 is not, we don't understand a lot about this, and we need to protect ourselves in a way that we have not had to protect ourselves for about 100 years as it relates to infectious diseases. So it's really looking at the many options that we can use to do that kind of protection.
You know, I mean, I think that we need to be more sensible and more wise in terms of how we adapt to new things. I mean, it seems like if we have just gone off the boil, everybody just gone haywire. So facial recognition is important for banks. However, we seem to just throw that through the window, and we want everybody to look like bandits. So how do we know the difference between somebody who is wearing a mask for health reason and somebody who has criminal intent? And I think the powers that be need to come to us in a more transparent and open manner in terms of dealing with some of these issues, because it seemed like if we all over the shop and we just hitting and missing. And as far as I'm concerned, that mask situation does not apply for Trinidad and Tobago, because we don't have any widespread infection of any disease here for everybody to be wearing masks. And because of that, I find that just applying prescriptions that are across the board for our situation, our professionals have been very lazy and they have not adapted our unique situation to the measures that will sensible and needed for our jurisdiction.
I'll tell you something that troubles me about this whole thing about the mask wearing and this COVID. Okay, I take the point that has just been made about mask. I'm neither, at least, at one time I certainly didn't see the need to wear it because the understanding was that the ordinary mask couldn't give you any level of protection. It was for those infected to use, not those who didn't have a concern. Now, as they've found out more and more about COVID, I can see the logic behind both those who have as well as those who don't have. I can well understand why both parties need to wear the mask. But
can I just jump in there really quickly? Particularly as it relates to the fact that we know, as much as we've done a decent amount of testing in Trinidad and Tobago, we have not done near enough testing in Trinidad. So we really don't know whether we have widespread or not. We honestly don't know. And that is why the government is also being cautious, because there is a possibility that the 20,000 people, for example, that slipped through the borders that were not part of the state-sponsored quarantine, that some of those people did have COVID-19. And because of the requirements that we were using at the time to do the testing at that time, because remember, when CARPHA was the only one testing for about a month and a half, and the requirements for testing for CARPHA means you have had to have just come into the country, or you've had to have been in contact with somebody who CARPHA confirmed as positive. So if you did not just come into the country, but you got into contact with somebody who did come into the country, one of the 20,000, and you had it, you would not have been tested earlier to say, yes, you have it or not, because you would not have met the requirements. So again, it goes back to us not testing even 1% of our population for us to really honestly be able to see that we do not have widespread testing. If we were countries like Iceland, for example, where they...
Okay, Doctor, we need to take a break. We'll continue on this line when I come back. We have our last break to take for the evening, and we'll do so now.
Together, we building bridges through space and time, filling the gaps in our hearts and our minds with love.
I was asked, what makes Tobago unique? I would have to say it's people.
And you have to understand that you could play better than him, so you feel you could do what you want. And in my case, go and do what you want.
If you are from the village, they call you teacher with your first name. But we who came from outside, they didn't know our first names.
Using $300 from this $1,000. And we were able to drum up $63,000 to do the trial event.
Trade, you have to have a trade. Mine is a shoemaker. Can you imagine I'm making shoes right now?
Community Legends, only on Tobago Channel 5.
Right, and we are going to be rounding up on this discussion with regard to COVID-19 and the wearing of masks. Doctor, you were saying something, Israel, Dr. Israel?
Yes, I was saying that Trinidad and Tobago, as much as we've done decent amounts of testing, we've actually not done as much testing as even is recommended by the WHO or any of those international organizations. When it comes to the volume of testing, especially when you compare us to other places, New Zealand, Iceland, and so forth, we have done less than 1 or 2%, tested 1 or 2% of our population. So we really, really don't know. Iceland, for example, tested upward of 15% of their population. And they included people who were high risk, as in who we were originally testing, but they also included community sampling, where they basically just sent out and said, hey, whether you have symptoms or not, come forward to test. And in Iceland, for example, they did recognize that individuals who did not have symptoms who also were positive for COVID-19. Now, again,
symptomatic people.
Asymptomatic people. Now, the reality is, because COVID-19 is so new and we're still trying to understand, we really don't know just yet how much asymptomatic people can cause infections. We are not sure. But that is why, for example, this whole issue of the mask comes in. Because you may be asymptomatic, you may have COVID-19, you may be asymptomatic. And because of the little that we understand about how it spreads, every time you speak, you know, we all know those people who, when you speak close to them, you feel their boulders hitting you. That is really how the virus gets to you.
Apparently in churches, when you sing loudly, it's worse.
Exactly. Places where you sing loudly, places where you cry, places where you shout. I mean, those are the things that cause the boulders inside of our mouths to spread out. So having that understanding that we really did not test as many people as we should, and that there may really still be people running around in Trinidad and Tobago with COVID-19, even people who are asymptomatic, it is better for all of us to take the precautionary measures and cover our mouth. Using the cloth mask is equivalent to teaching a child when you are coughing or when you are sneezing to cover your cough. That is what you are doing. Basically teaching them to prevent the spread of the droplets, whatever may be in those droplets, because we are not sure. That is the critical thing. We are not sure. So in this case, it's better to be safe than to be sorry later down.
Okay, but what I was going to say before was that issue as to better be safe than sorry, I understand. But you know, the concern that goes beyond all of that is this. We don't have a vaccine. And you may not now have it. You may not have it in the next 3 months or the next 6 months. But until a vaccine is found, you are always susceptible to catching it. So it may pass you by this time. It comes again and passes you by, but the third or the fourth round, you may then get it. This thing is, until they find a vaccine for this particular disease, we are all always at risk. And it's only now they're seemingly beginning to put at rest this issue as to the level of immunity you get after you have had it. Because at one point in time, they weren't sure that you would have immunity. You actually would get an immunity. And right now, they're not even sure how long, if you do, that immunity lasts. So until they find a vaccine, we are all just, it's a matter of, well, no, I wouldn't say luck and chance.
No. This is why we take kind of preventative measures.
Right. We're all required
to mitigate
take some measure to prevent the likelihood that sometime in the future, we may be in a circumstance where it comes our way.
But you know, the other thing too, as it relates to vaccines, even though we are open to vaccines as children, we take the mumps, measles, rubella, and all of those childhood vaccines, we tend to not be very open to vaccine as adults. So even if there is a COVID-19 vaccine, many of us are probably not going to take it anyway, the same way we don't take the annual flu vaccines that is available. So the possibility of us having it and spreading it is still going to be significant. Now, granted, with the vaccine and with enough people taking the vaccine, then we would have herd immunity, which is basically the protection of the entire community based on the immunity of certain people. But until
but herd immunity requires something like what? 60 or 70% of us all to have.
Actually, herd immunity requires upward closer to 80-90% of us having some level of immunity, either via vaccine or because we've gotten COVID-19 before and we've developed a natural immunity. And you are right, we don't know whether we have natural immunity, and when we do, how long it lasts. We really don't know. 5 years from now, we'll be able to answer that question, but we can't answer that question right now as it relates to COVID-19. We just can't.
And we don't know how long it will take them to come up with a vaccine.
Well, they said within the next year or so we should have that. So we'll see.
That's looking to be very optimistic. The average is about 2-3 years.
That is the normal time it takes to get a vaccine, yes. So, and that's why I am even a little bit conscious about a vaccine happening within a year and a half. It means, whoa, you're really rushing that process. We need to take a little bit more time, but I understand why it is critical to get to that point because of how dangerous this infection is.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're coming up to wrap up time. Anderson, let me begin by giving each of you you have about a minute and a half to express your thoughts on your observations and what you would like to see happen with regard to our attitude towards wearing the mask.
Right. Here's the thing. We all have our individual human rights. Most of these rights are enshrined in the Constitution, but those rights must and will always be balanced against the public interest and against the public good. We are facing a public health crisis. The government has taken certain measures to mitigate the widespread impact of COVID-19, as Faith would have indicated. It's very new to us. It's something that we have not been able to get under control. And she's quite right. We haven't done the kind of testing that we should have been doing. So in the interim, the only thing that we can do to mitigate the impact is to adhere to the measures. It might be an inconvenience. No one denies that. It will be an inconvenience, but that inconvenience pales in comparison to the opposite effect. It pales in comparison to us having a widespread outbreak of this virus that we can't control. So in the meantime, we obey our policies, we obey our regulations, we adhere to it, we withstand the inconvenience. It's in the public interest.
Anderson.
Yeah, well, the fact that we didn't do much testing is whose fault? You see, and therein lies my problem.
Listen, I would have to tell you that comparatively speaking, in terms of what everybody else is doing and they have done, this government has performed reasonably good or reasonably well in terms of their approach to this situation, don't you think?
From lack of testing? From lack of testing?
Only lack of testing.
From lack of testing? As the goodly doctor said a while ago, Dr. Faith, she said, we haven't done near as many tests as we should have done. So we don't really, we don't
as many measures as was necessary.
All we did was take the lazy way out and just put blanket, sort of like a sledgehammer to kill a fly. That is what we did here, and which went against people's enshrined rights. And we're going to have a lot. You lawyers going to have a lot of work to do in the not too distant future.
Dr. Israel.
Sure. Now, he is right. That has always been the situation when it comes to public health and individual rights. There have been countless cases in the courts because of this. So this is nothing new. I, as a public health professional, though, I have been trained to think about the worst that could happen, plan for the worst, execute for the worst, and then be happy when the worst does not actually happen. So I am asking people, this is one of those situations where even though the death rate may not be high, even though the people who are very critical may not be high, I don't want that one person to be my aunt or to be my grandmother, and I don't want it to be my neighbor. I don't want it to be anybody for me. So I am asking all of us to take that into consideration, that even though the rates are pretty low, even though we don't have very severe cases, even though those who get sick may not get very sick, most of us may not get very sick, the one person or the two people who may get really sick and may die from it, I don't want that to be somebody relating to me, and I don't want it to be somebody relating to you. So we all need to do what we need to do to ensure that we protect each other as much as possible, because this is one of those things that I prefer to be laughed at a year down the road because I was too cautious than to be crying because my mother has died because of it. You could laugh me because I am too cautious. Let us go down that road. This is one of them. Prevent, because the cure is not there, the treatment is not there, and the response, if it gets bad.
The cure is there.
So we need to treat with it.
You have to ask the Chinese.
All right. Just say to my panel, I thank you for this afternoon's contribution. And for my part, I simply say to us in Trinidad and Tobago, there's no vaccine, there's no known vaccine for this thing at this point in time. And until that time comes, we all are really required to be pretty cautious, because never know of our individual responses to having caught this thing. Because in the newspapers and you see the obituaries, or you watch the television, you see the pictures of people who've gotten it and have died from it. You are really surprised, especially the fact that some people who have died have the means to get the best healthcare possible. And yet, within a week of catching this thing, they died. So don't think that because you haven't caught it yet during this period that we have lockdown, that it's all over. I think it's incumbent on all of us to be as careful and as responsible as we can be in the meantime. And who knows, it may solve other problems of concerns with health in this country.
All right. Correct. Mr. Gift, before you end, let me just quickly leave the panel with one little nugget as well. If we had, in fact, increased the rate of community testing, there would also be those who would find that their constitutional rights have been infringed upon when they are mandated to take said test. Much the same way, the same folks who have an issue with wearing a mask in public would likely be the same folks who find that their right to not be tested has been impinged upon.
But is their rights?
All right. But we do have a responsibility to each other as citizens living in a country, and we have a social responsibility to each other, and that really needs to be maintained. Yes. Generally, okay. So good night to folks. Thank you, members of the panel, and to the public out there, the general public. Have a good night. Stay safe, and see you next week. Good night.